All right. So before we do anything else, I'm gonna let you hear the mix as it is from start to finish. It's basically it's not a raw session. There's no effects or plugins up, but there is some basic little leveling done. I've basically pulled down all the levels on all the tracks just so that they will not hit my mix bus too hard. And there are some panning for the backing vocals and the guitars and stuff. But I think you'll... I think it's good for everyone here, me included, to get sort of a starting point from where we are in the mix right now. Here we go. Cool. That's the track, Bad Blood by Huanastone. It sounds cool, and I think it's a good song as well. It's a good performance by the guys. And I mean, I think it really sounds enjoyable the way it is now. But I think it's important to have sort of a rough plan, or a rough plan at least. You need to have a plan for how you want to make it sound. If you want to succeed in mixing it in a shorter session, that is. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, or if you just want to maybe, surprise yourself with what you can accomplish with it, then you can just go ahead and mix a few hours here and there, and see what happens. But I mean, if you wanna be able to pull off a mix in a day session or in a couple of hours, then you need to sort of focus before you start mixing to sort of decide on how you want it to sound and a general idea of. So my general idea right now is to sort of keep it like it. I mean, it sounds nice. It sounds nice and thick, but you really need to sort of focus the lens a bit. You need to get some more high-end information going in there, and sort of maybe tame the drums so that they're snapping a bit more, and get it so that it sounds more like a record, basically. So really, it's a really fuzzy sort of explanation there, I know, but it's the best I can do right now. So before we go to the mixing, though, I'll be talking a bit of how I recorded this. It's a live recording where we recorded the drums, the bass, and these two parts of guitars live. And also actually included right now in the drum mix is a scratch vocal track that the singer used to sort of cue the different sections of the song. There is he actually sings in it. It's not a big surprise as it was a vocal microphone, but it probably won't be an issue. It'll only add a doubling effect to the parts where he's actually singing. You'll hear in a minute what it sounds like. It's a cool sound actually on this one. But we recorded the drums were sort of in the center of the main room here at Studio Möllan, and say the drums in the middle here. There's two large baffles, like sound barriers, to each side of the drums, and on each side of the baffles there were the guitarists and their guitar amps. And I wanted to sort of capture this performance as if it was like a live session, or a live session. It was a live session, but a live act rather. So there's a pair of ribbon microphones here, these Room RE254 mics. That should be sort of like a front of house perspective recording of the whole band. It's sort of failed, but it's still usable. You'll hear it in a second. The bass was kept out of the live room. It was in the amp was in a little smaller room adjacent to the main live room, isolated. The bass player, however, was in the same room as the other guys. I didn't want the bass in there because it has a tendency to go into the room mics and make the sort of room rattle a lot. So I kept that in its own little confined space. And then on another session we did all the overdubs, percussion here, the lead vocals, the backing vocals, the guitar solo, and this little guitar ad for this song. This is actually a whole album we recorded, so this is just basically the single of the album. So, the drums. I'll play a bit of the drums. I'll play this think I'll play right here. This is like the higher energy riff part of the track. No, it's actually the solo, but yeah, it's a high energy part of the track, and I'll solo up the drums for you here. I'll let you hear for, I don't know, a couple of bars. I'll also play a part of the verse here, going into the second part of the verse, so you can hear the floor tom. It's a sort of a big part of the verses. Yeah. So there's the unmixed, just leveled sound of the drums. And I'll go through the drums a bit here individually. Let's start with the kick drum. This is what all the kick drum tracks sound like. Yeah. And I'll go through them individually now. This is the kick drum mic number 1. It's an AKG D12. This is the second mic. It's an Neumann U89. Yeah, as you can hear, there are clearly different microphones, and I think they complement each other. They're a bit too boomy at the moment, and they need compression. So we'll make a little mental note of that for when we go into the more heavier lifting part of the mixing. This, however, I will give you an explanation about. It's a routing that I learned from a Pure Mix template, or Pure Mix tutorial rather, by Vance Powell. And if you haven't, try to go check it out, because it's an extremely, for this sort of music, it's a really inspiring tutorial. And I had actually just recently watched that tutorial before I recorded this band, and it's sort of locked up with his approach of recording that band that he did with this band. It's not it's not the same music, but it's sort of similar, and I really wanted to try his technique out there on this recording. So if you've seen that video, you'll see some similarities with the drums in this recording session. But this K bus is actually on my Neotech console. I routed both of these tracks out to the same bus, so I effectively combined them to one bus. That bus then was multed, so that the combination of the two microphones was sent to a DBX165 compressor and an Elysia envelope transient designer. The outputs of those two were then combined into this track. It's sort of like a circus act, routing wise, but it's a cool theory. I really wish I had done it more drastically, the processing, especially with the transient designer, because I think it's too subtle the way we hear it now, but we'll try to correct that later on in the mix. I'll show you I'll let you hear the track here. can hear that it's a bit snappier from the compression, more controlled, and it also has a little longer bloom. You can hear the mid-range of the resonant head of the kick drum sort of vibrating. It's recorded, by the way. The drum set is all my vintage late 60s Rogers kit that I have available here in the studio. And the kick drum has an intact resonant head. So it's sort of like I call it the vintage sort of setup on the kick drum, where there's no hole in the resonant head to put a microphone in. So, like the way Bonham would have used it, or all the jazz players of the 50s and 60s, and basically the way the kick drum is supposed to be. So it's really boomy and resonant, and that's what we sort of went for with the drums in general. You can hear the snare drum as well here. Snare drum. It's really loud, or it's really long and really ringy, and there's no dampening on it at all, and it's as low as we could get it basically before the head started to, crust up or crumble up. And this here, the VK bus, VK stands for virvelkagge in Swedish. That means a snare drum. That is the same procedure as with the kick drum, but instead of the DBX 165, it's the EL8X, the distressor instead. I'll cycle between these two, and you can hear the difference. Yeah. So what I said about the K bus goes for the VK bus. I wish I had been more drastic with it, but I wasn't. So we'll have to correct that. The snare drum microphone, I should say, that's a Shure SM77, which is a beige, really ugly old version of the Shure SM57. The difference there being that it's no output transformer in it. So the voice coil is wound up to 200 ohms, so that the output transformer isn't needed. And to my ears, it's like the best sounding SM57 that I've ever heard. And it's my go-to microphone for snare drum. If you find one, you should buy them. The snare bottom side microphone is a old Swedish-made PML or Pearl Microphone Lab DC63. It's a condenser that is set to Omni actually, and the condenser is it's a sort of a crispy sounding resonant-free microphone. It has a rectangular membrane instead of the standard round membrane as in the Neumanns and the AKGs and all that. And I don't know if it's the capsule or whatever it is, but it's a great sounding microphone that I absolutely love for drums and acoustic instruments and stuff. It's old, so it's a bit noisy, which is bad. But I mean, for drums, it could be as noisy as it's. You won't be able to hear the noise in the drum context anyways. If it's in front of like a quiet guitar, you will definitely hear the noise of it though. I'll give you a sample of it here. So, you hear there's a lot of kick drum in that mic, and that's intentional. That's actually what I usually go for with that snare bottom mic. It actually doubles as a beater, kick drum beater microphone. It's say you have the snare drum here, symbolized by this Swedish snusdosa, and the kick drum front head is here. I usually keep the microphone just underneath the kick drum, and with the capsules going in this direction, so the reproduction is that way and that way, so it's basically facing the kick drum. And doing that, I feel, instead of it facing up towards the kick drum, when it's facing like this, I feel I get a smoother sound, yet brighter though, sound of the actual snares. And you get more of the sort of the ring and the tone of the drum, instead of just that little sound of that the snares do. Just having a like a SM57 or something just under the snare drum has never worked for me at all. I think it for some reason it doesn't work with my ears at all. I need a fuller sound. And this microphone actually usually has a fair amount of compression on it when recording, actually, as well. But I've been good at taking notes here in the comments field on whatever I've been using on the tracks here, but there's no note of any compression. And I can't hear any compression either, actually, so this is going to be needing some compression. I see this microphone as almost like a parallel feed from the kick drum and the snare drum, and it's supposed to bring all the detail up to those two instruments, so that you're sort of, if you're playing softer on the snare drum, you can hear the sort of snares vibrate on the kick drum hits, and well, it gives you all the sort of detail of the articulation of the on the snare drum. It is duller, however. That's not a bright microphone. I usually record this a lot brighter, but I don't know what I went for actually when I recorded this. I think I actually placed it a bit lower, actually, lower down from the snare drum, more like half in between the kick drum and half between the snare drum for some reason. I don't know why, but it's we can work with this at least. And these two are my two effects microphones. The knä, which means knee, that is pointed towards the drummer's right knee, just above the kick drum. And this is a kit microphone just in front of the whole drum kit. This is an old Beyer Dynamic M610. It's a vintage Beyer microphone, a dynamic microphone that has sort of like a nice blend in between an old, cheap harp microphone sound, that mid-rangey nasal sound, and a more full-bodied, say like a Sennheiser MD421. It's like a cross between them, so you get some of that bite in the mid-range, but it's still a workable, fuller sound to it. None of that matters though, because it's actually been distorted. It's ran through a radial pedal interface that's in my 500 racks over there, and it's also via that radial interface, it's run through a full-tone OCD distortion box, and after that, it goes through a Moog analog delay for also in the 500 rack. This is what it sounds like. Yeah, that's a cool sound. Actually, I'll play the whole drum kit for a few bars, and I cycle the in and out on this knä microphone. Like all of the excitement, not all of it, but a lot of the excitement is gone when I unmute this, or when I mute this microphone. It's cool, and we'll try to process it a bit further later on. This is the other effect mic, and this is sort of like a fail. I was going for like an overall compressed, dirty drum kit sound. It ended up sounding a bit weird. It's one of my. I've actually built a pair of Royer clones ribbon microphone clones, and that's run through an API 525 compressor. And I've used this technique a lot before with that mic, but never with that compressor, and I thought it would be perfect, but it wasn't. I can hear it pumping, and I feel that the compressor is sort of constraining the sound rather than, adding to it. So this microphone will probably not be used at all. But the way I see these effect microphones, and also to an extent this bottom side snare drum mic, is parallel feeds of the whole drum kit or parts of the drum kit that you can blend in. And having those microphones makes you being able to be less heavy-handed with compression and EQ on the main close mic kick drum mics. Like that's the kick drum and the snare drum. So I mean, I really like this. I do use parallel processing in mixing as well, but I really like to sort of start that whole thing with in the recording process actually, and it's easier to get away with it. You can actually, what you can do is you can actually fuck these mics up in a way that they're unusable. I mean, not intentionally, but you could do a mistake on these microphones and like I can't use them at all. But you still have the the body of the drum kit intact, so you can still get a good mix of it. And if I didn't have these two microphones, I would probably try to mimic the sound of these with set up an auxiliary bus from the kick drums and the snare drums, and run that through a guitar amp simulation or something in Pro Tools, and feed it into the drum bus to get that thing. But I really prefer it to have it like this. So yeah, that's it. The tom microphones, it's not anything sexy, but actually there's a pair of Sennheiser 421s, and as you can see, if I zoom in here on the rack tom, there's 0 hits on the rack tom. So I have already lowered that in level. The floor tom, it's oddly enough not very low tuned when all of the other stuff in the drum kit is extremely low tuned, but this is not for some reason. It's still sounds. I think the drum sounds good when you hear it in like the context of the drum kit. Actually, to be honest, I could have recorded it a bit lower tuned, but we'll try to fix that. It's a bit honky sounding now. It needs some sort of maybe not compression, yeah, a bit of compression, and it needs to be fuller sounding, so I need to get rid of a lot of that mid-range. So onto the overheads. It's a pair of ribbon microphones, the Coles 4038. They're placed in the right over the snare drum, I would think, and they're in a sort of like a spaced XY thing, maybe like you would place a ORTF spaced type of microphones like that. And they're placed so that like one of them is aimed at the rack tom and the other one is aimed at the floor tom. So it's actually not. They're a bit like on the cross on the drum kit. It's not like if you were sitting in front of the drum kit and they would be recording this through this axis. They're actually recording through this axis, which I think is good, because then the ride and the hi-hat is going to be more to the center, and you're going to have the toms more to the left and to the right, and you are going to have the snare drum and the kick drum in exactly the same spot in the center of the stereo image. I'll try to get a photo or something to explain that further. And as you can see on the panning here, I plug the microphones in the wrong way. That's always a gamble for me. I get it 50% of the times I get it right. Onto a little more heavy hitting part of the track. Yeah, it's cool. It's I think the Royers or ribbon microphones in particular, or ribbon microphones in general rather, I think they're great for capturing rock drums, high end or rock drum crashes and the hi-hats and stuff. I think you get a fair representation of what they sound like in actually, and they're also, I feel like there's no limit onto how much sound level they can take, or how much sound they can take in the high end. They feel really unrestrained in a way in the high end, which I like. I also love those microphones for percussion instruments. That's it. On to these other color blue tracks. These are actually more... They're this other color actually because they are more of a band microphones. These are... I've also already talked a bit about the room microphones here. I'll give you a little sample of that here. Yeah, as you can see there, as you can hear, there's a lot of guitar bleed in that, and that's actually not bleed, that's intentional. If I was to redo this, I would have the guitars even louder actually, so that they would be more like almost like a hi-fi sort of version of if you put a tape recorder on the front of house engineer's recording desk, for a bootleg sort of thing. But you don't always get what you want here, and this is actually the first time I tried this setup for a recording, so the next time will probably be perfect. I'll show you a bit of this on my scope here. So, yeah, I just froze that image on the on my scope. You can see this is they call it the nebula spatial spectrogram here. On the vertical axis, there is frequency, so it's 20K and it's 20 Hertz. On the horizontal line here is stereo spread, so it's left and right. So you can see the frequency distribution to the left and to the right speaker. And it's a huge spread here in the low end. That is not supposed to be there. I think actually one of the microphones is busted. So, and I do remember having dropped them at some, well, over the years. I built these microphones probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they've been through a lot. But I mean, even if it's busted, I think they sound pretty cool, even them being weird like that. I mean, let's have a listen to the track without the drum mic, that room mic. Yeah, I think it does a lot actually for the stereo spread and for the room, of course, them being room microphones. So I will keep them, and I will see if it matters, this thing here, and I'm pretty sure it won't. But if it's an issue, we'll try to deal with it rather than scrapping the microphone. Last track for the drums is this Live Vox SM7. This is the scratch vocal microphone for Tobias, the singer. And I ended up keeping this actually. That wasn't intended, but I think the drums especially and some of the guitars sound really cool in this microphone. It is actually recorded through an old weird little broadcast mixer, a 4-channel Shure broadcast mixer with a extremely heavy hitting and brutal optical limiter on the output. It's a Shure M267. And, well, as you can hear here, it's doing something.
Girl, you're on your own all the time. Never been alone except for when you moan.
I'll try to find a spot where he's not singing. Yeah, it's a distorted, limited sound that I feel I like in the mix. Let's do the same with that actually. Let's listen to the drums with and without that microphone. Well, it adds cymbals. We'll see if we can do anything about that. But I think it adds to the depth of feel because you get a little, you know. There's the snare drum and the kick drum is going to arrive to this microphone after the fact that they have been recorded by the actual drum microphones. So this is going to be it's going to act a bit like a really fast slap delay in a way, as are the room microphones. So they bring you know depth of field to the drums, I think, and the fact that he's singing in it, well, it's not ideal, but I think we're gonna make it work. It's just gonna act as a vocal doubling effect whenever that is present. So let's hope we'll get away with it. Okay, that was the drums. Here's the percussions. All of the percussions are actually recorded with the same processing chain as that live Vox SM7 track. So that's been run through a SM7 going into Shure M267 mixer with a limiter on. I'll play you the whole percussion mix here. So you can hear there's a lot of room going on there, and the trained ear can hear that it's distorting and it's limiting. And I felt I needed that for percussion to stick out of a rock mix like this. To be honest, it's actually half out of just laziness because this microphone was already up in the recording room. So I just ended up using it basically, or I ended up trying it out, and to my ears it sounded cool when I did it. So the bass drum here, or the bass, not the bass drum, the bass is recorded in traditional fashion with a microphone and a line. The bass amp is a Fender bass Fender Bassman, that's what it's called. Yeah, Fender Bassman 100 head with a Bassman 215 cabinet, and it's recorded with a Sennheiser 421 or MD 421 dynamic microphone, and the line it's just a line. I think I used a line box that I built myself for it. Yep, that's what they sound like. The trained ear will hear that there is some slight phasing going on there. We'll see if we need to address that later on. Both of these channels are actually recorded with a fair amount of compression through a pair of LA2A clones that I have here in the studio. The lead vocal is recorded with an SM7 and recorded through an Heritage Audio 2264 preamp feeding an 1176A clone that I've also built here in the studio. And these two tracks are doubles, actually. So this is considered the main vocal, and this is the double. And the way we recorded this, or our intention when we recorded this, was to have them like an equal level double thing going on here, so that it's the double and the lead are gonna be as loud, or almost as loud. I can see from my faders here.
Stuck in the nowhere, lost in the fade. Feeling nocturnal, the Beatles stays the same. On and off again, you can't decide whether you should stay or run and hide.
Yep. That's the vocals. I think that's all we need to be showing you about them. The background vocals are actually the same. To be honest, actually here, the lead vocal and the background vocals, actually each take is recorded with 2 channels. I used a microphone split to split up the microphone. One feeding the M267 Shure mixer with the limiter on that I've discussed earlier, and the other going to the Shane that was used here, the Heritage Audio preamp feeding the 1176. But I didn't feel like I needed to have both of them going here, so I got rid of the M267 version on the lead vocals, but they're actually still here in the backing vocals. So even though there's 8 tracks here, it's actually only 4 takes. And the guitars, I'm gonna let you hear. I'm gonna play you a bit of the riff here. I'm gonna solo up the guitars. Yeah, that's what they sound like. The first one, the one to the right, sounds like this. I'm gonna cycle the microphones for you, beginning with the SM57. The last mic there was a Neumann U67 clone that I've built. That sounds fantastic, actually. Don't want to toot my own horn, but it's a great microphone. And it's actually not a 57. It's one of those. I think it's called Shure 545, which is like a chromed version of the 57 and with a pistol grip handle to it. To my ears, they sound like a 57, so that's what I call them when I record them. And they're recorded through a Vintage Design rack I have here, which is Swedish made, sorta like a Neve 1081 actually on these two. And the same on the second guitar, but those are Neve 1073s, so a bit slower and a bit thicker sounding. Let's have a listen to the second guitar parts. '57, 67, it's a fair amount of guitar bleed in the guitar microphones, which isn't really so strange as they were recorded in the same room. But as I said earlier, I would, if I was to redo this recording, I would try to get even more level out of the guitar amps, actually. That way the bleed will be even further down. And I mean, the ideal thing would be to have lesser hi-hat and crashed bleed into the guitar mics, but it's definitely workable like this, and it's not going to be a real issue for me. I mean, it's you have to keep away of. I mean, it hinders you from adding a lot of high end to the tracks. Basically, that's the issue, and so we can't do that basically. But I don't really like a lot of high end and in guitars like this anyway. At least not for this type of music, this type of stoner thing. It needs mid-range and low end to them, and I think that's where I need to put my focus in. Guitar solo, that's the last thing I'll go through. Let's have a listen to it. Yeah. So that's it with the session and the recording of it. So the next thing we're going to do is start to mix it.